If you're looking for a great gluten-free meatloaf recipe, I have just the one for you. I have a healthy version of a meatloaf. It's way more veggie packed than some other recipes. Traditionally, meatloaf is made with ketchup, but ketchup has a ton of sugar in it. So in this meal prep, I'm also going to be showing you how to make a low sugar ketchup from scratch. It's super easy to do, only has 3 ingredients. And then we're also going to be making a side of roasted potatoes, green beans, tomatoes, and onion, and it's absolutely delicious with this meal. The measurements for each ingredient are going to be featured in the description below, so please take a look at that if you're looking for precise measurements. So I have ground turkey, ground beef, celery, carrots, onion, garlic, salt, pepper, chili powder, gluten-free breadcrumbs, and an egg. In a large bowl, I've combined the ground turkey and the ground beef. I put the celery, carrot, onion, and garlic in a food processor. If you do not have a food processor, you can certainly just chop it really fine and it'll come out just as well. It's a less chunky texture in the meatloaf, and that's kind of how I like mine to be. I feel like it blends really, really well with the meat whenever it's made like this. I have 1 egg, gluten-free breadcrumbs, salt, pepper, and chili powder. We're going to mix this all up and get it into the pan. Now you can mix this with either your hands or with a spoon. I personally don't like to put my hands in the meat, but I know that a lot of times that's really, really necessary. It's really difficult to do this with just the spoon. Now that the meatloaf mixture is completely ready, we're going to be transferring it into our pan. You can use a loaf pan or you can do a baking dish like I'm using, and you'll want to try and make your meatloaf as even as possible. That's going to help with the cooking time. Our meatloaf is almost ready to go. I'm going to get started on the sauce that we're going to be placing with the meatloaf. In a majority of meatloaf recipes, they call for ketchup, and I'm going to show you a low sugar option that you can use that's homemade and that is a delicious addition to this meal. I have tomato paste, honey, and I have salt. That's all that's going to be going into this sauce. So we're going to add the tomato paste. I'm going to add the honey to the pan, and it's currently at a low heat temperature, and you want that to cook down until the tomato and the honey are both more liquidy. Still going to be a thicker sauce, but once the honey is all cooked in, you'll want to add just a very little bit of salt. So you'll just take a little pinch, add that in, put it back on low heat, and just stir that in briefly. Now that the sauce has been completed, we're just going to add this to the top of the meatloaf. Unfortunately, we don't need a lot, and we'll get it all spread out throughout the top. And now it's ready to go in the oven. We're going to be putting it in at 375 degrees and cooking to an internal temperature of 165. Now that the meatloaf's in the oven, we're going to start preparing our side. To make this, you're going to need green beans, red potatoes, half of an onion, salt, pepper, garlic powder, and 1 cup of tomatoes chopped. And you can use any kind of tomatoes. I opted to use grape tomatoes this time. And then you'll also need some olive oil to season. Because the potatoes need to cook longer than the other ingredients, we're going to get the potatoes and the onions on the pan and season that with olive oil, salt, pepper, and the garlic. Now we're going to get our potatoes put in the oven. While the meatloaf and the potatoes are cooking in the oven, we're going to get the green beans prepared for the side. I take about 2 to 3 big handfuls of green beans. I rinse them, and I'm going to blanch them in water really quickly. So before I add the green beans in, you see that the water's boiling. I'm just going to add some salt. It's always good to salt your water. It just helps with the flavor of the green beans. But you want to wait to salt the water until it's boiling, because it actually makes it take a longer time to boil if the salt is in before it starts to boil. So we're just going to get these added in here really quickly. When you blanch your green beans, you're just going to leave them in for a couple of minutes. This is going to help tremendously with the color that you get, and it's also just going to give it a crisper texture. If you don't blanch them prior to putting it in with the potatoes, you're going to notice that they tend to get a little bit wilted and a little dry, and this is going to help preserve some of the moisture in your vegetable after you're baking it. I strained the green beans as soon as they were done on the stove, and I'm going to just place them in a quick ice water bath. By placing them in ice water, it helps keep the color until it's ready to go into the oven. We just pulled the potatoes out of the oven, and we're going to add the rest of the ingredients for our side. So we have our green beans. Get those spread throughout. 1 cup of tomatoes, and be very careful, it is hot because it just came out of the oven. Just going to mix this all together. A little bit more salt, pepper, and garlic. We're ready to put those back in the oven. This is our finished product. This side was cooked at 375 degrees. The potatoes were put in for approximately 15-20 minutes prior to the green beans and the tomatoes being added. The total cook time for this side was about 40 minutes. Everything has turned out fantastic. The total cooking time for the meatloaf is approximately an hour and a half at 375 degrees. And we have our finished product of our entire meal prep. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a like, comment, or subscribe to my channel. Also, please feel free to share this with your friends. It's a fantastic recipe and very, very easy to make. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.